Hello and welcome. My name is Jasmine Fishner and I work for True Diversity as the Talent Acquisition Specialist. Welcome to this webinar on resume and interview prep. We're really happy to be partnering with AISES and to do this session. Thank you all so much for inviting us to be able to do this. At True Diversity, our mission is to have a meaningful impact on the lives and livelihoods of historically excluded job seekers by removing roadblocks resulting from systemic hiring bias and providing equitable access to opportunities at companies that are sincere about diversity and inclusion through investment and action. We have two professionals here with us today who will help us shed light on how to prepare and shine in your next interview. I am happy to introduce Maney Hutchin with Women Impact Tech. Women Impact Tech is an inclusive community empowering women in tech, also known as WIT. WIT conferences partner with companies that are committed to inclusion and innovation, hosting impactful keynotes, panel discussions, breakout sessions, and help create a dynamic conversation surrounding inclusion, innovation, and tech advancement for women across all industries and workplaces. I also have Katie Hawk with Big Eye. Big Eye is a data quality engineering platform that makes it effortless for data teams to measure, improve, and communicate data quality for their organizations. And to go a little bit more in depth with our ladies here, Maney Hutchin is a D&I recruiting manager at Women Impact Tech. She began her career coaching engineers through the initial recruiting stages, reformatting resumes, preparing for interviews, and accepting new positions. At Women Impact Tech, she has been able to take her experience and apply it to helping companies across the U.S. diversify their engineering teams. Maney is passionate about sharing what she's learned from working with startups to Fortune 500 companies, that the process of finding your next position doesn't have to be intimidating. And we have Katie. She grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, Chico State alumni, currently living in Arizona with 15 plus years of people operations experience and 10 plus years of experience with Silicon Valley startups specifically. She's currently working at Big Eye, a data quality engineering platform startup headquartered in San Francisco. She loves her job because she gets to listen and motivate employees to help to have a fulfilling career, whatever that may look like. There is no better feeling than seeing people succeed to her. Thank you, ladies, for joining me today. To begin, I'd like to pose the question that should be at the forefront of everyone's mind. Why is it important for companies to hire diverse teams and create more inclusive workplaces? Maney, Katie, your thoughts?
Yeah, for me, I think it's important because creating a diverse and inclusive environment really establishes a sense of belonging among employees. And from there, you have employees that feel more comfortable, they feel more connected, they're going to work harder, they're going to work smarter, and you're just producing a higher quality of work.
For sure. Katie?
Yeah, and to double down on what Maney said, like regardless of your role, like in the business, a more diverse and an inclusive workplace, like helps everybody feel equally supported in the areas of all the different aspects of the workplace. So this is going to help earn a deeper and more like commitment from all of your employees.
Absolutely. Absolutely. At the end of the day, I really do also believe it's about the support, right? Because you need your team to feel supported. And as we go through this webinar, we're going to go through the stages of what it takes to get a job, from building your resume, how to prep for an interview, getting ready for a Zoom or in-person interview with some tips and tricks, and lastly, how to frame difficult questions to pose to your interviewer and to answer the easy ones that they may pose to you. So let's get started. We will begin with resume prep. Maney, what are your thoughts and best practices on resume prep? What should be included and what should be excluded? Can you give us a rundown on what a successful resume looks like?
Yeah, of course. So really, I have 5 tips as far as getting your resume ready to not only apply, but get ready for that interview process. So the first tip is going to be to keep your resume between 1 to 2 pages long. I think that anything longer just kind of takes a little bit more time. There are really easy ways to dilute your resume. If you find that you have a lot of experience, you have a lot of positions that you want to include in your resume, you can kind of take that and take your most recent, maybe 3 to 4 positions, actually do a job description. And then from then on, just kind of take about 1 sentence to describe maybe what you were doing at the company, what your role was. You don't really need to go into too much detail, past those 3, 4 experiences, anything to keep it under 2 pages. My second tip is to keep your resume clean. So the biggest trick here is to try to make sure that there is more of a white background versus black font on your resume. So the crisper, the cleaner that it looks, the better. You typically want to stay around a 12-point font. I would never recommend going bigger or smaller to keep your resume under 2 pages. Using bullet points to describe your job details rather than a paragraph, and bold and italicize the company and the position title rather than trying to bold and italicize buzzwords, keywords. Any hiring manager, HR team that's going through your resume is going to see that. You don't need to bold it and point it out. It sometimes creates a little bit more chaos in your resume too. The third tip is to avoid being redundant in your resume. So again, there are a couple different ways to go about this. As far as describing your responsibilities, it's very common for your responsibilities to probably be pretty similar at multiple different jobs. So just find a creative way to word it differently, and avoid copying and pasting and just trying to make it sound a little bit different, maybe customized to the company, just switching that up a little bit. Attempting to use as many verbs as you possibly can at the beginning of every bullet point. So again, mixing it up a little bit, keeping it creative. And lastly, listing accomplishments that are going to be unique to you and your success. If you find that you were, maybe on a team that participated in a project, make sure that you're listing the things that you did as an individual, not necessarily what your team did. Or if you are going to list what your team did, go into a little bit more detail as far as what your role on that team was.
For sure.
Do you have a question?
I actually do have a question from a business member. Is it okay to have a small blurb about yourself, like a quick little about me? And if it is, how long should that be?
Yeah, definitely. And I was going to get into this a little bit later, so this is actually a great question. I think as far as that blurb goes, make sure that you're customizing it to the position that you're applying for. So if you are going to talk a little bit about yourself, make sure that what you're saying, your goals are, what your experiences is going to apply to the position that you're looking at. But there's nothing wrong with applying a little bit of personal touch to your resume. I keep it between 2 to 3 sentences. I wouldn't make it too long, but making it personalized is always a great idea.
Awesome. And then you also said, make sure that your resume aligns with the position that you're applying for. Could you go a little bit more into detail with that?
Yes, definitely. So customizing your resume to the position that you're applying for is really important. It's not a one size fits all. So taking times to make small little tweaks, obviously always make sure that whatever you do put in your resume, you're going to be able to speak to in an interview. But making sure that the job title aligns really well with the position that you're applying for. Especially nationwide, if you're looking at different companies, internally, they're going to use very different titles for different positions. And that might not always, be as obvious to a hiring manager or an HR team. So making sure that your job title aligns really well with what you're applying for. Qualification summary or an about me, make sure that you're, definitely making that personalized to the position that you're applying for as well. As we kind of went over before, job details, as far as your description goes, if you do notice that maybe you have a bullet point that you listed last and that's the very first bullet point in a job description, just move that bullet point up to the top. Make sure that the first couple bullet points that a HR team or a hiring manager is going to see really applies to the position. And lastly, your skills section. Make sure that the skills that you have listed are going to be the ones that just very similar to the job details, the ones that they have listed and seem like they are a must-have for the position. Make sure you have those listed first. And my last tip as far as resumes go, make sure that you always try to read your resume through the hiring manager's eyes. And what I mean by that is, again, kind of going back to personalizing it, rather than saying I'm a problem solver, maybe in your job details, list a situation where, there was a time that there was a problem and what you did, how, your skills, your talent help solve that problem. Being able to show that you're a problem solver rather than saying you're a problem solver is going to be a huge difference. And again, kind of make you stand out to that hiring manager. Always include volunteer work. I think that that's a great thing to include. Again, personalized, makes you stand out a bit, shows a little bit about who you are outside of work. And just always kind of keep in mind, hiring manager is going to have very limited time to look at your resume. So make it very easy to skim, make it short, concise sentences that are really going to list your greatest achievements.
Awesome. Really love all those. Those are so spot on. Thank you, Manny. All right, on to the next here. Now we have our resume clean and pristine. Let's get to interview prep. Katie, can you please give us the best practices for getting ready for an interview?
Absolutely. So preparation is key for any interview that you're going into. So really, it starts the day before your interview. This helps you feel a bit more comfortable throughout the process, because interviewing is not easy for anybody. Nobody likes sitting in front of somebody else and having to say their life story or what they've done. It's a little uncomfortable. So night before, this is really what I recommend. And this is what I've done in all the different positions that I've interviewed for, is you really want to research the company and research the role the night before. Make sure you go to the company's website, that you check out LinkedIn, that you check out Glassdoor. You can also just do a quick Google search of the company, see what has come down the pike. Maybe there's an announcement of funding or an announcement of an acquisition. You never know. So make sure you have all of that information just kind of right front center in your brain the night before. But also what's important is the role as well, because you're going to be most likely interviewing for several different positions. So you want to make sure that you understand the role very well, that you know exactly what the company is looking for. So reading through the job description, even printing out the job description and potentially having it next to you during the interview works well. That would work well during a Zoom interview, not an in-person interview. But since we're all doing everything in Zoom right now, I've done that before in the past. It's been very, very helpful. Also, most companies before the interview, they will give you the people that you're going to be talking to. So research their backgrounds. Maybe you worked at a similar company. Maybe you guys overlapped someplace. Just knowing a little bit about their background will help frame certain questions that you may want to ask when you're interviewing with them. So one of the main things that I've learned to do is having questions prepared for each session. So again, do this the night before. You want to really ask questions that are relevant to each section. So if it's a hiring manager and it's a person who's going to manage you, maybe it's more about career growth. If it's an HR manager, potentially maybe it's more about the culture, job ladders, what your progression could be within the organization. So you definitely want to be able to have those mapped out. And somebody gave me this tip like a year ago, and it was to create Post-it notes and put it around your computer with questions, important talking points. If you read the job description and you see that, teamwork and collaboration is really important, you can frame some different stories maybe around those. But nobody, especially during a Zoom interview, can see those Post-it notes that are around your computer screen. So I even do that just in my daily job when I know that I am chatting with candidates and I want to hit certain talking points. So very, very important, and be as strategic as possible. This is going to show like interest and buy-in. But it would be important to be able to stay away from questions like, maybe if you're talking to the hiring manager and you want to know, like, do you like your job? It seems like that would be an easy question to ask. And yes, it is, but it doesn't show the right type of information that you're looking for. Really, what you want to know is, why would somebody want to work for your team? So think about different ways to be able to frame questions, to be able to get the information that you want, but don't make it sound like in a bit more of like a condescending way. So think about great ways to be able to frame your questions. And then also find an appropriate place to take the interview. I have numerous stories of times where we have had interviews where people have had inappropriate things in the background. And then when we do a team debrief, instead of really focusing on what the candidate brought to the table, it's like, oh, did you see this in the background or that in the background? So make sure that it's clean, that there's no clutter. It's really important that you just have it mapped out, even from the lighting perspective as well. Right now, I'm sitting in front of a window and the window is shining on me. The worst is when there's a window behind you. It's really going to black out your face. Mm-hmm. So make sure that you test that out the night before. Also, it's really ideal to be able to have your outfit selected as well. Nothing too busy, a little bit professional, no busy prints. As you can see, I have just a nice, black top on, not too low cut. And also something to be able to really get into the mood of interviewing. This is more so focused on Zoom interviews, not in person. But for Zoom interviews, make sure you're dressing all the way to the floor. So on Zooms, a lot of the times you hear people are wearing shorts. I do it all the time when I'm working. However, when you're in the interview, you really want to get into the mood. So make sure that you dress top to bottom. Also, what was that, Jasmine?
Oh, I was just saying, like, good point. You also never know if you have to like get up and grab something, or, they ask you, do you have your resume, but it's across the room, and just make sure you wear the bottoms. Yes.
Well, has it ever happened to you, Jasmine, where all of a sudden like a loud noise happens and you have to jump up and then your unprofessional shorts are showing?
You just never know. Just make sure you wear the bottoms for
exactly.
sure.
Mania, has that happened to you as well?
Luckily, it hasn't happened to me, but I think I've seen enough videos over the last year and a half of horror stories. So
exactly.
I learned my lesson through other people.
Not the best way to be a YouTube sensation. No, absolutely not. So also, make sure you test out all of your equipment. Make sure your Wi-Fi is working. Make sure your microphone is working. Your computer is set up. Your camera works. If you don't have Zoom already on your computer, make sure it's downloaded the night before. Just really make sure you test out everything. I always wear a headset. It helps because there's a microphone really close. I would suggest not wearing any of like the AirPods. Those seem to cut out at not good times. So if you could find like a hard wire, it'd definitely be more beneficial during an interview process. And then of course, the morning of, really important. Make sure you get good night's sleep. Get up in the morning, eat a decent breakfast. For me, it's usually yogurt, fruit, bananas. Jasmine, what's your go-to power breakfast?
Eggs, fruit, and some oatmeal.
Maney?
I'm a big oatmeal girl. Yeah, love oatmeal.
Yes.
Can't go wrong.
Exactly. Make sure that it gives you energy. So if it's coffee, if it's tea, go for it. Make yourself presentable. Again, you have your outfit already selected, so not too much you have to do there. Have some water close to you as well. I always have a glass of water. I do a lot of talking and you never know. And then also, especially if it's during a Zoom, even if it's in person, make sure that if you need to take a restroom break, just ask. We're living in a digital world at this point. Everybody understands. Ask for that 5-minute break. Or even if you just need to take a second to regroup, it's okay. We all understand. So it's really about, making yourself comfortable and preparing yourself, for the day's events.
Absolutely. Awesome.
Yeah.
And then quick question here. How early should somebody show up to the interview? Like right on time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes before, on the day of?
Great question. Totally forgot to follow up on this. So what I traditionally suggest people do, show up about 5 minutes early. Again, it makes sure that your Wi-Fi is working. It makes sure that all your equipment is working. You be on mute. and you be on, and you don't have to put your video on for Zoom. But also for an in-person interview, I'd say at least show up 15 minutes early. Any earlier than that, maybe stay in your car, hang out outside on a bench or whatnot. It shows that you're eager, and it shows that you really want the job when you're there on time. I'd say if you show up right on time, that leaves a lot of room for errors in ways. If let's say you're going in person, there's a car accident, you get behind a bus, there's a tractor that's slow in front of you, you want to be able to optimize for that. So make sure that you build in any of that time and show up early.
Excellent. Love that. And then I have this question kind of for both of you ladies, because it fits into both of your sections, I feel, both with interview prep and then Maney's next section here on Zoom and interview tips and tricks. What are some red flags when interviewing that a company might not be right for you?
Maney,
it's a good question. Yeah. That's a good question. I think that it's very important to know what you're looking for before going into the interview. So, kind of take some time to set aside the must-haves for yourself. And if you notice that maybe a company, say, work-life balance is something that's really important to you, and you notice the company, it talks about, needing to work on the weekends or needing to work a little bit late. Maybe there's a lot of travel and that just doesn't work well with your lifestyle. I think those are things to kind of keep an eye out for. Definitely we'll get into this in a minute, but definitely pose questions that are going to help you figure out if this is a good fit for you. And if those answers just aren't really what you're looking for, that's going to be the red flag that you're going to want to look for.
Yeah. And then also when you're talking to people and they're not engaged, that when this position is important, that somebody is going to be engaged. They're not going to be, typing on their computer or, drawing pictures to the side. So engagement is really important on both sides. And also I've had this happen many times not from my perspective, but what people have told me is that when the person you're talking to is negative about one of their team members, about the company, that would be a red flag to me, that the culture maybe isn't very, it's not very inclusive. It's not very collaborative. It's not, there's not a lot of teamwork going on. So think about some of those things as well. If you ever.
Definitely.
Love those. Thank you, ladies. All right. So now we have our resume. Your microphone and your speakers work for your interview. So now how do you show up and show your best self during the interview? We've got Maney up here next with her advice and her tricks and tips. Go ahead, Maney.
Yes. All right. So just to kind of piggyback off of what Katie was saying earlier, always make sure that everything's ready to go, especially in a Zoom. You want to check your audio, check your video, any outside distractions, pets. Mine are currently in their crate and in a bedroom so that they don't jump up in front of the screen. I think everyone, loves to see babies and pets, but just kind of make sure that this is a time that there aren't any distractions. Any links to an interview, a Zoom interview, make sure it works, make sure it's there. Everyone's human, people forget things all the time. So just kind of taking a couple minutes ahead of time to make sure everything is good to go. Next, again, on dress code, I would say, no matter what, even if the company is really casual and nobody dressed up for work, just show up in business professional. It's just a good go-to. It's safe, it's clean. And, I think that it's important to remember at this point in the interview process, Zoom interviews, in-person interviews, these tend to be the last steps in that interview process. And really at this point, companies are looking for that culture match. And this should be a time that you're also looking for that culture match. So I think that, going into this final round or in-person interview with the mindset of, I'm going to speak my mind. I'm going to speak, my opinions on things. I'm going to let them know the way that I do things. And, again, we'll kind of get into ways to go about that. But, kind of going into this interview, realizing, you probably got past the hard parts of the interview. You probably already did the coding test and the technical parts. So this is where you get to meet your team members, hiring managers, and really get to show them who you are as a person. Kind of going into handling feedback. This is going to be a time in the interview where you'll probably, again, be meeting with multiple members of the team. Maybe they'll give you a situation to work through, a real life situation, and kind of see what you would do as a team member, as an individual contributor. So there are ways to handle getting that kind of feedback. You always have to remember too, you're not always going to be on the same page as everyone. That's kind of what makes, working on a team so amazing sometimes, and also hard. So kind of take that into consideration when you're going into this interview process and you have an opportunity to be collaborative. If you get feedback that is maybe kind of tough for you to hear, that you aren't crazy about, take a moment, process it. Don't speak too quickly. If you're kind of coming off of emotion, just take a second. And when you do approach a situation, just be very aware of your tone, and acknowledge their side, acknowledge what they saw, how they, approach the situation, and then kind of take that and pivot it into, explaining yourself. So kind of I think a good way to go about that is, hey, I think that's a really great idea. I've actually never thought of it that way. Let me explain to you kind of my thought process and how I got to this answer. That kind of shows that you are a team member. You can collaborate. You can work really well with others, and kind of take that feedback and maybe apply it to yourself later. Who knows? Maybe they can take your feedback and apply it to them. But, making it a little bit more of a back and forth, rather than they just said this and I'm not crazy about that. Now, I think this is also a really great time in this in-person interview to come really prepared with questions that you want to ask. As I said before, make sure that what your must-haves are for this position. I make sure that you ask questions around that. So a couple different ways that you can kind of go about that. And, maybe it's culture, maybe it's management style, maybe it's career growth. A couple different questions that I have that you could ask, how you would evaluate the performance of the person in this position. This is really great. Are there annual reviews? Are there, do you have meetings with your boss every week? Kind of how does that work? And is that going to work for you? Is that how you're successful? What's a typical career path for someone hired into this role? One of my personal favorites, what would you say is the biggest obstacle for this role? I think that's great. You kind of get to learn a little bit about maybe what the harder parts of your day-to-day is going to be. Asking about the company culture, asking directly about management style. And then I think another great question is asking about their expectations for the role, making sure that, you're on the same page as what this role is brought in to do, and what your end goal is here. I think that, as far as asking these kind of questions, this is a really great time to, remember that it's a two-way street. You are more than, welcome to ask any type of question that you want. I don't think that, I think like Katie said, make sure that you customize it a little bit, put a little bit more thought into it, be very strategic, but also just don't be afraid to ask questions. You are going to be spending most of your week here. So with these types of people, so make sure that this is a good match for you as well. Lastly, canceling, rescheduling. I think that, we have, everyone realizes that there's, it's life. Things happen, things pop up. So there's nothing wrong with rescheduling. I think a good rule of thumb is at least 24 hours beforehand. Obviously, that isn't always going to be the case, but just reaching out as soon as you possibly can, letting them know, something came up. I am still so excited to meet with you and to chat with you. I'm still very interested. I'm just going to be unable to make it. Is there any way we can reschedule? And kind of going about it, still letting them know that you're interested. And if you are going to cancel the interview, if you decide, ahead of time, hey, this isn't a great opportunity for me. I'm really not that interested. I don't think it's a great match. Just reach out and let them know. Try to avoid a no-show. And let them know, hey, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciated it. I enjoyed meeting with all of you. I unfortunately just don't feel like this is a great fit for me. Best of luck in your search. And kind of move on from there.
Loved all of those. You actually answered 2 of my questions I had.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yep. But just to reiterate, you mentioned, interviewing your interviewer, and it is important to ask about things like culture, management style, career path, and growth opportunities. So all those, love all of those. And if we need to reschedule and or cancel, do it in a timely manner, preferably within 24 hours. Yes?
Definitely. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you, Manny. And lastly, for our last section here, how do we frame and answer difficult questions and stay on top of the easy ones? What questions can you ask to better understand the company? Katie?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to start the easy way with the easy questions. So there are lots of resources that are out on the internet right now to be able to research, but honestly, it can be pretty overwhelming because there are tons of different resources out there. Oh, here, prep for these questions, prep for these questions. You can have a list of 100 questions that you're going to be prepping for. So I put together 3 questions that are fairly common that are asked pretty much every time I've ever interviewed. So these 3 questions I would say would be the best to prep on. So the first one is, why are you looking for another job? Very common. Probably the first thing either the HR person is going to ask, the recruiter, the hiring manager. So number 1, stay positive. Whatever the reason is, it could be that you're looking for more of a challenge. Potentially there's no career progression. I've been stagnant in my role and I've been asking for more responsibilities, but I'm not receiving them. All of those are completely valid. The one thing that you don't want to do is badmouth an employer. This pretty much gets you vetoed almost right away. As a recruiter for almost 20 years, I've probably talked to tens of thousands of people. And as soon as they badmouth an employer, done, gone, vetoed, because it's just, what are they going to do when they come into the organization? Are they going to badmouth their teammates? So again, just stay away from the negativity. Definitely stay positive. And then another common one is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I've seen this question go haywire several times where people are like, I want children, I want to get married, I want to do this. And all of that is fantastic. However, you want to keep it professional and job related. But be honest, be deliberate in your future goals. Say, I want to go into management in the future. I've been mentoring some individuals and management seems like the next ideal step. Or if you don't want to go into management, that is fine. At every company, there's going to be 2 different paths. There'll be a management path, and there'll be more of an individual contributor path. Say that you really just want to be focused on what you need to do. You're not interested in management, but you really want to work up the ranks and you want to be a senior and then a principal and then a staff level or whatever the levels may be. So be very, very deliberate in those future goals. And then also a third one, why are you excited about the company? Why are you excited about the position? This, again, will always get asked. So think through several reasons why you either like the company or like the position. So I can flip it back to interview prep. You're going to be getting a lot of information about the company, about the position. So maybe it's something specific that you saw on Glassdoor. Maybe it was a review that somebody left where you can say, you know what, I was excited about the company before, but when I looked at the reviews on Glassdoor, I saw that there's a highly collaborative environment and that the career progression, you have defined job ladders, whatever it may be, whatever is important to you. I don't want to, tell you what to say, but whatever is going to be important to you. Like for me, teamwork, collaboration, and communication are 3 big parts to any position. So I would always bring it back to those 3. But regardless of any of the easy questions that people ask you, you always want to bring it back to the company or the position. Like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Make sure you incorporate the position that you're in right now and where you want to be in the future. What excites you about the company? Well, you can see the last 5 years of growth of the organization. And then you can say, I'm excited for the next 5 because I see that, you're going to quadruple in size. You're going to expand to new states. You're going to expand here or wherever. Make sure you just always bring it back to the reason why you're there interviewing for the company. So you want to make sure that you have your success stories picked out, what Mamie said, depending on the job that you're interviewing for. So again, circle back to all that prep work. But not all the questions are going to be easy. There are definitely going to be some that are going to be a bit more difficult than others and really hard to frame. And you're going to sit back for a second and think, what is the purpose of them asking these questions? So when it comes to framing difficult questions, what is most important here is make sure you understand the question before you answer it. If there are any parts of it that you don't understand, ask clarifying questions. If you need a second to think about it, sit back and say, you know what? I haven't been asked that question before. Do you mind if I think about it for 10 seconds, kind of frame my thoughts around it? That's fine. You don't have to just, start right away because then you're going to be blabbering, probably not going to make much sense. So one of a popular difficult question is, tell me a time when you and a colleague disagreed. How did you resolve it? This question gets asked a lot because the purpose is, how do you handle feedback? How do you deal with it? How do you work past it? Is there a path to being able to work past it? So there's a method that has been out for probably 20 years now. And when I am prepping my candidates on how to be able to talk to the hiring managers, I always talk to them about the STAR method. So it's a compelling narrative of what you as an individual would do. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So situation is you want to be able to set the scene and give the necessary details of your example. So you want to be able to frame it in a way that the hiring manager is going to understand, okay, what's the situation? And then the task is exactly what your responsibility was in the situation. So let's say, going back to when you disagreed with a colleague, the situation could be, we got a notice from our boss and we were to work on a PowerPoint presentation together. And the way that we separated everything is, my colleague did section number 1 and I did section number 2. However, my colleague was not happy about what I did in section number 2 because it overlapped with their section and they thought that I was trying to steal their thunder. Stuff like that has happened. So then we go to the action. So explain exactly what steps you took to address it. So you can say something like, when that happened, I didn't want that person to fester. I was not trying to step on their toes. So I took them aside in a room and explained my side of the situation, that, we were working independently. I didn't realize that I was talking about some of your parts in your PowerPoint presentation. And then the result. What was the outcome? Once you had that conversation, you both got on the same page. You both realized that you were working as a team, you were working together, and now you've worked on numerous PowerPoint presentations since, but maybe you tweaked something. Maybe you guys are working a little bit more dependently versus independently on different sections. So again, that was little bit of a random example, but you see, you want to be able to tell a story and you want to be able to make it compelling. So whoever is listening to it on the other side follows it. So that's where STAR really comes into play. And if you can't think of an example, that doesn't really show well in any interview, right? I know there's a time where all of us have been in an interview and we get a question and we're like, oh gosh, I can't even think of an example. But look, we all make mistakes. It's really important to point out what we learned from those mistakes though. So you want to be able to be specific as possible, be quantitative, give as much quantitative, and qualitative data as you can, but also be concise. So keeping the story to maybe 2-3 minutes would be ideal. If we're going on the 10-15 minute mark, you've kind of blown through the entire interview and most likely the other person stopped listening to you.
We love the SEER method. That's totally true though, all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do have a quick question for you, Katie. What do you do when you just, you blank? When they ask you something, it could be something simple even. It could be, how's your day going? And you just freeze.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Absolutely. You take a second. You take a second. You don't have to answer right away. And take a step back. And again, maybe if it's not how's your day, I don't think that's going to be a question, but if it's a question that you haven't heard before, take a step back and buy yourself a little bit of time. Wow, that's a great question. I have not been asked that question before. Let me take a step to be able to sit back and think about it. I've even done that before. When I'm talking to candidates, I get candidates asking me questions on a daily basis of things I don't know. And what I've said is, that's a great question. I know where to get that answer. I'll be able to get back to you. You don't have to prove that you know everything all the time. Us as humans, we don't know everything. So take a step back. If there's something that you don't know or that you haven't encountered before, you can say, I haven't encountered that before. However, if I was to think through this theoretically, here's how I would probably approach it if I was in that situation. That's a completely fine way to be able to answer that question.
Okay, awesome. And then a little spin on it now.
Yeah.
Is it appropriate to go back and answer something if you forgot, but then you remember? So they ask you, that question at the beginning and you're like, hey, it's not coming to me right now. It's something you definitely know though.
Absolutely.
Maybe 30 minutes goes by. Can you answer it then?
Absolutely, you can. At the end, most interviews will be able to give you about 5 minutes at the end to be able to answer any questions. If all of a sudden during the interview process, you realize, I've got this, I thought through it, please answer it at the end. You can also follow up in an email afterwards as well, if it comes to you even after the interview.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, okay. And one more question here for both of you ladies, actually. Should you send a thank you letter after the interview?
Katie, you want to go first on this one?
Yeah. So,
Cool.
So I would say if you're going to send a thank you letter, be very deliberate in the reason as to why you're sending it. As Jasmine had said, if there was a question that maybe you don't think that you answered quite appropriately, you thought about it a little bit more and you have a different answer, then that would be a very deliberate reason as to why to send a thank you letter. If it's just hey, thank you for your time, really appreciate it. You don't really need to do that. If it makes you feel comfortable, it's not going to hurt you in the process, but it's not necessary.
I completely agree. I don't think it's going to be a make or break. I don't think you won't get the position because you didn't send a thank you note. But it doesn't hurt. Again, if you have a purpose, I think it's a great idea. Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. And we asked AISES members if they had any questions that they would like us to answer. So we have a little bit of Q&A here as well. So we're just going to run through them a bit. First one here. For a resume, what if work history makes sticking to 1 to 2 pages difficult? What's a good rule of thumb?
Yeah. Personally, I think that as far as work history goes, let's say you've got 20 years of work history, that you'd like to list, and it's just not fitting in that 2 pages. Anything past 10 years of experience, I would say, just make it a short little, this is where I worked, this is the title I had, this is how long I was there. And really that's it. I don't think that there's much else you need there. I think that you need to make sure that you have the most important things on your resume, your skills, your most recent experience, education, volunteer work, those types of things are going to be a little bit more relevant than to what you did 20 years ago. So if you'd like to list that, feel free to just kind of do a couple sentences of, this is what I was doing, but I don't think you need to take too much time or space, really.
Most interviews won't ask anything that you did 10 years ago because it's most likely not relevant anymore.
For sure. Yeah. Awesome. And if I have a gap in my work history because I took time off to take care of my child, I did just a leave of absence, what is a good way to address that on my resume? Katie, you want to take that one?
Yeah. I mean, caregiving is probably one of the most important things you can do. So make sure you just put it on as sabbatical, caretaker for, I mean, you don't even have to really go into that much detail. It happens all the time. I have people taking sabbaticals for all sorts of different reasons. And as I said, it's probably one of the most important things that you can do. So you should not feel ashamed of it. Yeah. Definitely write it on your resume.
Excellent. Awesome. And should I be listing all the different software and programs that I have used specifically? There we go. Mamie, you want to try that one?
Yeah, I think that it's important to list the programs, technologies that you've worked on. Maybe not the technologies you worked on in college that you haven't touched in 6 years. I think that, the rule of thumb with, your skills section, the technologies you've used, make sure that, if someone asks you, would you be able to do this in this position? It's a yes. If it's something that you've touched and you wouldn't be able to do, unless you had a little bit of training, maybe not relevant. Or you can always specify, I'm proficient in these and I'm familiar with these skills. If you do feel the need to list those, I would just be very honest. You don't want to put Java on your resume if you haven't, coded in Java in 10 years, so just kind of make sure that it's something you can speak to and again, is relevant to your experience.
Yeah. And you definitely don't want to word dump, and what you can do with that skill section as well, even if there's a whole bunch of different items that you've used in the past, you can also take some off and make sure the ones that are super relevant to the job are listed. So again, if it's like, I'm proficient in Microsoft Office, but you're going in for a coding position, although it's really important to know how to use Microsoft Office and those things, focus on the technologies that you are most proficient in and keep off some of the things that it's like, not really that relevant to the position.
Love that. All right. This one will actually be for both of you, I think. After I submit a resume, what is an okay amount of time for me to wait before checking back in if I've not heard anything from them? Same thing for after an interview.
So I would say, I'll take this. I'll take it first. When you submit a resume to just an applicant tracking system, most of the time you are going to receive an email that says, if we're interested in chatting with you and your resume fits our criteria, we're going to get back to you. I wouldn't do a follow-up email after that step. I would do follow-up emails once you're in the process. And when you're in the process, it is very important, as one of your last questions to be able to ask, is to set up expectations and know what the next step is. When am I going to be expected to hear back from you? If they say 3 days and it's been 4 days, absolutely send a follow-up email. You don't want to do it the day after, or if it's before the time that they said, because it shows a lot of eagerness on your end, which is good, but you want to be able to know what those expectations are as well. So I would say make sure to ask that question first to know when to expect to hear back, and then adjust when you want to send that note afterwards.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. There's nothing wrong with asking, say, it's maybe a little bit earlier on in the process, or you have submitted a resume, just, give it a week or so. You have to kind of keep in mind that there's probably a lot of people applying for this position as well. So it's going to take a little bit of time. But, when you do reach out, just make sure it's hey, I'm really interested in this position. I just, would love to know if you're interested in moving forward, or, what the timeline looks like for that. Just make sure you express your interest as well.
Okay. And last question here. Can I ask, when will I hear back? That's specific line there. When will I hear back? Is that okay to ask, or is there a better way to ask that?
Personally, I would say I don't think there's anything wrong with asking, when will I hear back? I think maybe if you aren't comfortable with saying, when will I hear back, asking, kind of going back to that last question, asking about a timeline. How quickly are you looking to get this person started in this position? How quickly can I expect to hear back from you? kind of framing it a little bit differently if you don't feel comfortable, but I don't think there's anything wrong with posing the question that way.
Yeah. 100% agree.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Well, this brings us sort of to the end of our segment here. And just to recap really fast, we went from building our resume, how to prep for an interview, getting ready for a Zoom and or in-person interview with tips and tricks, and lastly, how to frame difficult questions and answer the easy ones. And as my last question for both of you ladies here, if you could sum up what you think are 2 of the most important pieces of advice you could give to job seekers preparing for an interview, what would you say? Oh, Katie, I think we lost Maney there.
I think we did lose Maney.
Oh, well, I guess it's up to you to answer.
Well, it's up to me, everybody. But here, I'll take it home. So be yourself and stay authentic to who you are. But to make yourself feel a bit more comfortable during this process, remember that make sure that you interview the team as much as they interview you. It's completely a two-way street. It is not you just sitting there on a box in the middle. You're doing the same thing. You want to make sure that this is where you want to stay for the next, 2, 3, 4 years, however. So that'll take the pressure off you a little bit to remember that it's not just them interviewing you, but you're interviewing them as well.
Excellent. Well, I guess that's all we have, guys. So thanks everybody for watching. And if you're looking for your next role, please check out our website, truediversity.com, for more information and to see open positions at great companies. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.